All right, we are live. So, hello, everybody who is here and everybody who's going to watch this later. This is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here with a very special guest, Dr. Jon Truitt. He is a professor of Latin American history at Central Michigan University, and he's going to talk to us about educational gaming in colonial Mexico and also dogs.
Yeah, sorry about the dogs, Liz. If I could do something to get them to stop staring at the other dogs that are walking across the house or walking across the street, I would. But I don't have that magical wand. So they should stop here in a moment. Thank you anyway. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the talk, and then if there are any questions as I get to the end, I'm happy to respond to them or not, as may be. So this is a project that has been in development, oh my gosh, for a little while now, 3 or 4 years. But this last year, I've really spent digging into archival sources in Latin America and in Spain and across the United States and sort of writing it. So it's still not done. I'm 4 chapters in-ish. I say ish because I can't seem to stop writing the 4th chapter. It keeps going and I keep splitting stuff off for yet another chapter now. But let's get at this. I'm going to start by doing a background of information to make sure that everybody is up to speed on sort of Latin America, well, Mesoamerican religion writ large, right? Each group has their own sort of twist, but I'm going to generalize here and paint in broad strokes. And then once I sort of get through all of that, I will go ahead and jump into sort of the heart of the research. So thanks. Go ahead and advance the slide. I guess this is a picture of Molina's dictionary. That is one of my main sources. It's his 1551 dictionary. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. Okay. All right. So with Nahua religion, we need to understand a little bit more of the background between it and Catholicism. Nahua religion was focused on order versus disorder. And so it's a balance that everybody is trying to strive for in the space of their lives, right? It's not that order is bad and disorder is good. It's not that order is going to overcome disorder. They seek a balance. And so the image that we have here is a Codice Mendoza. It's a really famous cover image for Mexico City, Mexico Tenochtitlan. The eagle on top of the prickly pear cactus you'll see on the Mexican flag. The city is split into 4 different areas, basically neighborhoods that are really showing sort of balance to some extent, right? You'll notice that there are 4 people on one side and 2 in each of the other sections, and that's in part due to the power of those neighborhoods. But really, this is their focus, is this balance. So disorder, just to give you some ideas here, examples of disorder are war and birth, right? Both are messy, right? Childbirth is incredibly messy. Sex is considered disorderly. It's messy as well because, right, there's fluids and other things. And these are the things that create civilization and life. As warriors go out to fight, as you see in the bottom of this image of the Codice Mendoza, they're bringing civilization to areas further afield from the Mexica or the Aztec Empire as we know it today. But birth is also essential to furthering the longevity of a civilization. Without birth, you have no new citizens for that empire. And so women who die in childbirth are equated with men who die at war. This is disorderly, but this is important, right? Order, which I noticed a typo there, but order, actually it's a Spanish, see? You have bathing, which equals health, right? So you get rid of the germs and the dirt and you get to health that way. And so when children are born, one of the first things they do is they take a bath, and that first bath is ritualized. It's just like Catholicism and baptism. But it's not good versus bad. It's you need to get all of that off of you because it is unhealthy to continually be dirty, right? So these are 2 areas they're saying is you need to make sure that In life, you are balanced because the earth is slippery and you don't want to fall off. In Catholicism, though, you have good versus bad, right? And the idea is that good will overcome bad, or bad will overcome good. The examples here, and I'm going to go through these faster, are, in the bad, you have the 7 mortal sins. In good, you have the 7 virtues. You have 3 theological and 4 that are cardinal. Go ahead and advance it. All right. So language is really important to culture, right? Words have a cultural meaning as well as sort of their definition, but there's a specific cultural use. So some examples here are this in Spanish, right? We have the word pecado, which means sin, and it's the idea that you've done something bad, sort of like my dogs downstairs. You need an idea for bad in your culture, right? In order to have this idea of sin. How do you explain to that? How do you explain that to someone who is not a part of the Abrahamic faith, right? If they're not Jewish, they're not Muslim, they're not Christian. How do you explain the concept of sin? Well, one of the ways that they attempt to do this is the friars create these pictorial catechisms. The idea is that they are going to create little prayer books for the indigenous peoples using imagery that is sort of using similar connections to their pre-contact imagery. And right here, what we have is actually the image from one of these prayer books called the Testerian Codices. And this is the image for sinner. The person on the left, that is a representation of their soul, right? So it's white, it's black and white for the soul, and it has holes in it. And the image to the right is a little bee. And that bee is what has poked holes in that sinner. So you have a sinner, right? The pecado that's being poked holes into the soul. And so these images, whenever you read it, represent sinners. But there isn't a concept of sin in Nahuatl, right? The word that they choose to use in the language that's sort of important is they use tlazoli. Tlazoli means filth. Dust is tlazoli. My office is tlazoli. You can't really see it, but it really is. War is tlazoli. Birth is tlazoli. Cooking is tlazoli, right? Not all of that is bad, but it is all disorder, filth, right? So how do the friars translate Nahuatl to tlazoli? Well, they use sin is tlazoli. It's this sense of things being trash. Tlazoli or tlazoli also translates to sin, fault, defect. Straight tlazoli translates to basura or trash, right? So it's not an exact fit, but tlazoli is also ritualized within Nahuatl, within the Nahuatl language, right? So you have sin, which is this concept, and you have tlazoli, which is this concept, and they don't really come together. So go ahead and advance it.
I'm just gonna say I would never have imagined that was a bee and then a soul with holes in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just gonna.
All right. So loan words help us see what ideas and concepts have entered into a culture, right? And they're going to be really important because they represent both new concepts that are entering, but also points of contact between different cultures. So a couple of quick examples that do a couple of different things, right? So from Spanish to Nahuatl, right? So the word originates in Spanish and it enters into Nahuatl. The word campana, meaning bell, right, becomes Micatepuztli in Nahuatl in the 16th century, which means dead person metal. And then it is eventually adopted as campana. Now, why dead person metal? Because bells were being rung whenever people died to signify their funerals and their burials. And there were so many people dying from disease that the bells were constantly ringing. And so the Nahuas referred to it as dead person metal until they adopted the word campana into their language. We then have from Nahuatl into Spanish, tomac, which in English is tomato, right? So tomato is a loan word of the Nahuatl word tomac as well. Translated in the bilingual dictionary Molina, where I'm going to be pulling other things, the initial translation into Spanish is a certain fruit that serves as a souring agent in stews or sauces, right? They didn't actually have a one-word translation for tomato. That then becomes tomato, not tomate, tomato. And so you have, sorry, my computer just blanked out there for a moment. So in this process, right, you have tomato being adopted. It's a really essential fruit to salsas. We know it today, right? So it's going from Nahuatl to Spanish. The third one is interesting, and this is where we're going to start touching a little bit on games, but we'll get to it more. And this is a Spanish idea that goes to Nahuatl, and that goes from Nahuatl then to Spanish. Ejemplo, the word means example, but it comes to represent in the 16th century a Nahua religious drama. And then it is turned into Nahuatl as Neishquitili. Neishquitili then becomes a loanword in the 17th century, Nesquitilis, by 1673. And I actually found, I believe, an earlier attestation just recently, but didn't have time to add it in here, of it being adopted into Spanish even earlier than that. And so Spaniards will simply use Nesquitilis as a reference point to that their dramas. Okay, go ahead.
This is interesting.
All right. Any questions?
Yes, I do have questions. All right, so I understand like the kind of attempt to associate sin with like the word for trash,
Yeah.
but if it's still at base, right, associated with a word that doesn't mean bad necessarily, how do you get people that you're trying to import this concept to actually understand that by sin you actually mean bad?
Well, so in part, they don't really have a concept of bad. So how do you get people to understand a concept of bad that just isn't there?
Exactly.
So part of it are these Nesquitilis. They're moral dramas, and they're going to have the moral dramas, and they're going to put on these giant performances where indigenous people are playing the roles, and they're doing these giant, like, people are going to be getting pulled down into hell kind of, through the stage floor and things like that, right? So they're trying to show which actions are beneficial, which actions are bad within the Christian faith, and they're going to do it with dramas. They're also going to do it with, they'll use pictorial images where they have a stick and they're pointing at those sticks to try and get at that. They're going to do it with sermons done in Latin to people who don't speak Latin. But this is in part, right, at least initially, they're all coming together and they're sort of learning the same languages.
Yeah.
And so overall, what it is it's, and this is what I'm really interested in, is it's these points of contact, right? It's this new culture emerging. And while I can't say that there's a new definition of bad versus good that emerges vis-a-vis like European ideas, but you have a new culture that's emerging in this moment as people are coming together and they're getting together more regularly and talking. And so it's sort of that process of immersion. When you're learning a language through immersion, you eventually come to understand concepts that don't really make sense in your own culture, but they make sense in the other one. And you'll have phrases that are just better in one language for something you want to say than in your own language. And so this is that moment where it's starting to happen. It's not really a good answer, but it's sort of the best one that we have, I think. Somebody else might have something better.
Well, it just seems like this would be so hard to get at in terms of research, because nobody would talk about what they're doing with each other in the way that we're talking about it now. So this must be like a lot of very interesting work, reading and looking at images and pulling out what must have happened to the best of our ability.
Yeah, well, and I mean, thankfully for me, in terms of the good versus bad and filth stuff, right, that I'm pulling from other scholars, and I can point to a really brilliant, amazing book. In fact, it's the book that made me decide that I wanted to study Latin American history, by Louise Burkhart, called Slippery Earth, published in 1989. And it's just brilliant and lovely. And that's the one that really gets at sort of understanding the definition of tlasoli as filth, and that is the use of that as sin.
Interesting. All right, games. I don't know
Okay,
if it's games.
games. All right. So what we're going to do moving forward is we're really talking about the formation of culture and the use of games for that space. And so part of it is justifying and explaining how I get there. So this is a moment of the birth of sort of colonial Mexican culture, which is different than Mexican culture today, but it extends into it. And really, I would say it's, I mean, going back to terms where things are better in one language than another. The name for Mexico, for colonial Mexico, was New Spain. So technically, this would be New Spanish culture, which just doesn't work in English. Because then it sounds like I'm saying a culture that is new to Spain as opposed to New Spain. But that's really what we're looking at. And so the colonial part is there, but that implies a lot of imposition. And I'm not saying there wasn't imposition, but there's a lot of agency by the indigenous people that the colonial terminology sort of takes away and strips away, whereas calling it a New Spain culture or culture of New Spain, you have more agency from all of the people who are there, and that's definitely there. So on the right is an image by Diego Valadez. He's a mestizo, so he's indigenous in Spanish, and he becomes a friar in the 16th century, and he goes to Rome, and he's representing friars, Franciscan friars, in Rome in the 16th century, and he creates this drawing of the ideal atrium and sort of the ways in which it's used in helping to convert the indigenous peoples. And I put it up here because there's no games present in that whatsoever. This is what he wanted to show as the ideal way that people are learning. And up in the upper left-hand corner is a famous friar, Pedro de Gante, who is Valadez's mentor, teaching trade skills. And on the right-hand side is just a generic friar teaching the story of Genesis. You have marriages, you have burials, you have women and men and matrimony, and you have the apostolic 12 Franciscans bringing Christianity to the world, right dead center. But this is the idealized image, and what it doesn't show, but what needs to be there is games. And so I'm going to disrupt this image a little bit. To form a new culture, you need substantial points of contact. And until this point, the best arguments for it have been these intermediaries. Translators are intermediaries where people have sort of hung the idea of them helping to form and shift the culture, and church fiscales, which are these high-ranking members of the church who are indigenous people. They're often bilingual or trilingual. They're educated. They can read and write. Not all the time, but frequently. And they serve as points of contact between Spaniards and the indigenous communities. And then you have friars who are learning the languages. These are, the priests serving in the indigenous chapels. But all of these people are in moments of very official communication, right? Legal communication. So intermediaries who are officially translators are there for court cases, right? They're there for criminal cases. But they aren't there for the day-to-day formation of culture, right? If you think about the most boring details of your day, right? Not the exciting, like momentous achievement that sort of gets reached, but like, I need to go grocery shopping. I need to run to the post office. I need like not all of them are boring, right? But these mundane moments of your day, you can't have a translator there, right? But these are those moments of contacts that we need. And those moments of contact, right? When you go to the market and you need that fruit that is used to sour things, right? You need a term for that. And in getting to that term, right, in working through with pantomimes and other gestures, you form a part of the new culture, right? These people are coming together in those moments and talking. So the translators aren't going to be used then. And when friars are going out, friars are often going into areas where they're going to learn the language, but they don't have the language as they get there. They don't have translators yet. So how do they discuss Catholicism, right? And what's going on during this era? So how do they sit down? How do they have these conversations? This is what I'm looking at. So, okay, go ahead and advance it and keep that perfect image in your mind. The way they do it is through games. And the way I get it at it is through the pages of dictionaries. So in Spain, before contact, you have lots of people playing loads of games, chess, cards, dice. They have books of morals. They have confessional manuals for gamers. They have educational games and a whole lot more. And I say everyone plays, almost everyone plays, but it's like all the way up to the Queen. The King and Queen of Spain are incredibly involved. There are good arguments being made that without Isabella of Spain, the modern day chess queen would not have the power she does in chess, but that develops around this time. So like everybody is involved in playing games. What we have up there on the right is an image from Alfonso X's book of Chess and Games. And it's a really cool book with a lot of just different imagery of games, but this is a person of probably Christian ancestry playing with someone of Moorish background game of chess, because it was this incredibly mixed society of Christians, Jews, and Muslims in Spain. And Alfonso X argued that games help bring everybody together. And so there are women playing games and men playing games all over the place in that book. In Mesoamerica, right, so central Mexico, and down into Guatemala and Yucatan Peninsula, you have, prior to contact, the game Ulami, which is the famous ball game that people would play with the hoops on the side, and everybody talks about people getting sacrificed because of the game. It's also known as Tlachtli. It just depends on whether or not you're talking about the ball or the ball field. We don't have a name specifically that is uniquely used for the title of the game. You have Patoli, which is pictured above on the left, which is a gambling game. It's very similar today to Parcheesi. And then you have the flyers. So if you go to Mexico, you'll have a tall pole and people who are then attached to it, and they'll descend wrapping around the pole, doing acrobatic aerial dances. You have what is known as foot juggling or log juggling, where people lay on their back and they're taking this log and they're tossing it in their air and they're catching it on their feet. And it's a pretty interesting thing as well. And I realize these are performances, but there's also an element of game definition that I can get into later if we want me to. And then there's other games that I've found but don't really have a good definition of, but I've had mention of them. So, and everybody in this society is playing. Again, most everybody. There are occasionally odd people who don't like games, but most everybody's playing. These games are then points of contact, right? So these are those points where I start getting really interested in that they're transforming culture, right? Because each time people sit down to play a game of chess or to play a game of Patoli is a point of contact that the culture is being formed around. So where do we have these points of contact early on? Starting in 1519, when the Spaniards show up and they are going on the so-called conquest, they're going into New Spain. They aren't allowed, or into the Aztec Empire, they aren't allowed to bring cards or dice with them. There's in fact a prohibition on dice and card playing when on entradas, as they were called. So these are these entries into these new places. My dogs really hate them too. And one of the Spaniards with Cortez goes and cuts a series of drumheads and hand draws the cards on these drumheads. And so they make a deck of cards. And Spanish cards are 48 cards, not 54, because the 10 and the jack are combined. And so they make a deck of 48 cards. And then when Moctezuma and Cortez are together for 3 months or more, I can't remember the exact length of time right now, they play games. They play cards. They play Patoli. They play another game called Totoloque or Albodoque. We're not, like, I've seen different references to it. I believe Cortez introduces dice as well because he really liked gambling games. And so we have all of these moments, and there's lots of people observing. We then have in 1528, when Cortez goes back to Spain, sorry about my dogs. When Cortez goes back to Spain, Charles V, the King of Spain, asks the group of Nahuas that Cortez brings with him to play games with him and to show him their games. And so there's a German artist named Wieditz, I'm not sure how I'd pronounce that, who draws them playing a bean game and draws them doing log juggling for him and playing ulami as well, right? So these are some of these earliest examples that we have of them playing games together.
Oh, that's so cool. Hey, we have a question from the audience. So Eric Lee wants to know, were the prohibitions religious based? The prohibitions on cards and dice?
Yes, the prohibitions were absolutely religious based at this time. What it is that gambling and blasphemy is different. So luck at that time is different than our perceptions of luck now, because they believed that God, Christ, the saints, or in the case of the Nahuas, that Macuilxochitl, pictured in the image of Ptolemy above, who is the god of Ptolemy, are present when the games are played, right? Gambling or luck wasn't luck because God was omniscient, God was present. The saints you requested help from were present. So when you threw those dice and your roll failed, and you started swearing, you were swearing literally in the face of God's decision to have you lose that roll, right? So you're questioning God, and so that made blasphemy really bad. But there were certain games and certain amounts that you were allowed to gamble. It was very societally based. Not all luck games were banned, but like priests and other people who were connected with the church weren't allowed to play cards or dice because they were seen as beneath their station, but they were absolutely allowed to play chess. Yes, far cry from bingo in Catholic halls these days. Indeed. Right. So religion is going to be present in games in both societies. I mean, ironically, when I started this research, I wanted to get away from religion. So
It cannot be done.
yes, I could not escape that. So, yep. Other questions? If not, we'll keep going.
All right, let's roll.
Is this pace okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Go ahead and advance the slides. There we go.
You got it.
Okay. So in these pages then, right, this is a bilingual dictionary image back here. It's actually turned to the page of jugador and jugar, which are to play and player. You have a new point of contact in games. Dictionaries are going to be my evidence and they're my proof. As I go through these, I'm getting just scads and scads of games that we didn't know were being played, that we hadn't even thought about. Because so many of the criminal records are focused on dice and card games, we knew they were popular. And we figured chess was there, right? But we're going to get down into the weeds a little bit more here. Now, the reason why bilingual dictionaries are really great is that the friars who are writing them wrote down the words they thought the most important for communication, right? A bilingual dictionary, unlike a regular dictionary, isn't focused on like the academic elements of words. They're focused on easing communication. And so especially when you are using, one of the only printers in the Western Hemisphere to create the dictionary, you're going to make sure that the words that are in it are words that need to be used. Or if you're handwriting a dictionary, which many of these were handwritten dictionaries, you're writing down words that are important to everyday communication, right? And that's going to be for confessional, but that's going to be for talking and meeting and discussing and eating and planning and road building and marketplaces, right? Okay, so I'm able to get at games because they believe that they are important for day-to-day communication. So go ahead and advance the slide. All right, so this is a brief selection of some of the games that I've been finding, and these are all 16th and 17th century. And I show a spread here because I think this is going to be important. So in Nahuatl, I actually have just over 20 games, I want to say, distinct mentions. I've got 3 here. Chess becomes Quapatoli, which is wood patoli. Dice becomes patoli. And cards become Amapatoli, which translates to paper patoli, right? And so you see a trend of them taking the Nahuatl game patoli, right, and adopting it as the translation into Nahuatl for various different European ideas. Conversely, if you look at the other side of things and you look up dados, which means dice, the translation is patoli. Patoli is based off the root for the word bean because they throw beans that are marked with pips on one side. So these are from the 1555 dictionary. So it wasn't 1551. I made a mistake earlier. It's 1555 dictionary, which is the earliest Nahuatl Spanish dictionary we have. It's incredibly important. He'll republish it in 1571 and adds a couple of new notes to the games section between 1555 and 1571. If we move just 4 years down the road and we move to the west of Mexico, to the Putupecha speaking region, we have another Franciscan writing a dictionary over there, but he doesn't introduce chess. Instead, he introduces the game Alquerque, which is another strategy game. It's like Nine Men's Morris is my understanding of it so far, or a little bit like, I mean, some people compare it to checkers, but it really isn't. There's Alquerque 12 and Alquerque 9 and Alquerque 6, and there's a whole bunch of different variants in it. But it's really popular, especially amongst Dominicans. There's also bowling that's being played in the West, and bowling will be introduced as well in Nahuatl regions. And then dice is also introduced there, right? So you've got some consistency in games, but you're starting to get variety, which demonstrates that the people who are going aren't just translating words that they believe they're supposed to have. Like there's not a set, like these words will be translated. It's these are the words being used in our area. These are the games being played in our area, right? So the Dominicans go south to Oaxaca, and they are going to, we've got actually the 1578 dictionary, and then we have another one that comes along a little bit later for Mixtec, which is also down there. They introduce Alquerque in the area. They also introduce chess. They introduce word games, which was also in the Nahuatl region. But then the one that's really intriguing to me is this one that shows up here at the bottom called Gallina Ciega, Little Blind Hen. And we'll talk about that one a little bit more in depth here shortly. And then you have the Jesuits. And the Jesuits are late to the game in Mexico. And Jesuits don't like to write down, they don't like to introduce new games. So they write down what's there, right? And so they, with Doema, which is sort of northwest, north central, I want to say, sort of Sonora, Arizona region. I could be off on that a little bit. They have kids games, but then the one that's really interesting, going back to the loanwords area, is Patoli. Because, right, this is their Spanish word for the indigenous game that they run into, right? So Patole in the 17th century has been adopted into Spanish as a loanword, which is really important because up until this point, the assumption had been that Patoli had been completely like wiped off the map in the 16th century because they were trying to hunt it down and burn games, copies of games and things like that. But the evidence demonstrates that it actually continues to be played. And here's one of those points of evidence. So, okay, go ahead and move us along to the next.
Are we going to get to talk more about the chickens?
We're going to talk more about the chickens.
Okay,
I think
excellent.
the next slide has actually got that as the title. There you go. Okay, so La Gallina Ciega y Catholic Faith, right? So I did this PowerPoint slide in Spanish not that long ago, and I tried to translate it in a rush today, and clearly I failed. Anyway, this is in and of itself a moment of intercultural connection. So La Gallina Ciega, the little blind hen, is going to be really important. So friars are going to be introducing games into the area. And what's interesting is Jeronimo de Mendieta is a Franciscan friar writing in the 16th century. has a little statement in his 2-volume set that I happened to find where he says that basically, in the midst of attempting to learn the languages of the indigenous people and to convert them, they had to set aside their sort of austerity and seriousness and become like children and embrace the children and play games with them and play with them. I've got the exact quote around here somewhere, but it's like they had to stop and play games because that's how they learned the language, right? And so, how did they learn the language? One of the ways was with chess. Uh, they would sit down and they taught Nawas how to play chess. They taught other people in other areas how to play chess. Why? Because they loved playing chess. And as they're going off into these areas, these are people they're working with. They don't necessarily have lots of other Spaniards around them. The other Spaniards are days' ride away by horseback. So if they want to play chess, they have to teach somebody how to play chess. And while, yeah, you could threaten somebody at sword point to learn how to play chess, they're not going to be a very good chess player if you do that. And you want them to learn how to play chess, right? They're taking cards with them. They're taking dice, even though dice and cards are still prohibited by the Spanish government in the early 16th century. It's not going to be until 1552 that Philip II of Spain decides that cards are going to be legal, and he's going to create a monopoly in the colonial era for cards because he can't get rid of them, right? But it's the Franciscans and Dominicans who are taking cards with them as they go to these frontier regions to work with them, right? And they're taking dice. The Franciscans do word games and they do other things. Dominicans tend to prefer alcarque over chess, but it's not always the case. But I find it more in their dictionaries than I do the Franciscan ones. They also like cards and dice. They like word games. Word games are going to be some of the most important ones for learning languages. And then you have Gallina Ciega. Gallina Ciega is a call and response game. The picture here is Goya by Goya, and it's a 18th century painting of Gallina Ciega. If you look it up, it'll also call it Blindsman Bluff, because it is apparently, I don't know if Gallina Ciega existed before Blindsman's Bluff or vice versa, which happened first. I don't even know that they are identical games, but they seem similar. They're call and response games. So if you're unfamiliar with Blindsman's Bluff, think about Marco Polo, right? And so what happens is there's a phrase, and I've translated them, but it's little hen, what have you lost? And then the little hen responds, the chicks and the snacks, right? And the idea is that the people who are in that circle, somebody's going to attempt to grab that spoon away, and that person's going to tag them, I believe. The Gallina Ciega is incredibly popular amongst children in Latin America. So when I was giving this talk in Puebla not that long ago, everybody in the room knew what Gallina Ciega was. It's along the lines of duck, duck, goose in the United States, though it should be noted that I am Minnesotan, so it is duck, duck, gray duck in the correct portion of the world. There you go. I'm in charge of this talk, and that's just the way it is. So, but everybody that I've talked to who grew up in Latin America knows Gallina Ciega, right? So the game is over 500 years old, which is kind of cool. It's coming over from Europe, and Dominicans introduce it. Franciscans, I don't know if they're playing it or not. They might be. It wouldn't surprise me, but there's the challenge here is that there's the word Gallina Ciega is also used in reference to the maguey worm. So this is a worm that if you take a shot of tequila, you swallow the worm and you take the tequila with it. It's called the Gallina Ciega as well. So it's the little blind hen. And
the worm is called that?
The worm, yeah, is called the La Gallina Ciega. And so if you look it up in these dictionaries, you can't always tell if it's the worm or if it's the game. The Dominicans specifically say the game Gallina Ciega, right? So with the Dominicans, I know it's the game, but the Franciscans just say Gallina Ciega. But there's references to the worm being called Gallina Ciega in the 16th century in documentation as well. And so I can't be certain if it just says Gallina Ciega, which it is. So the Augustinians, we don't really know quite what games they're really favoring. I only have one dictionary written by them at this point, so I just need more information. But the Jesuits go to a region and they write down what they're encountering in that area, such as Patole, right? So we get a lot of good loanwords. We can get Spanish loanwords that are entering in through the Jesuits. We also see the impact of other religious orders. So the Dominicans were the first to go to the Andes, but the Jesuits write the first bilingual dictionary. So when the Jesuits get there, the Dominicans have already been in place. And so the Jesuits are recording Alquerque and chess and these other games that I think Gallina Ciega, I have to double check on that one though, in the Andes region that they don't record any place in any of the other dictionaries they write because the Dominicans preceded them in that space. Okay, go ahead and advance it.
Actually, I do have a question from
Yes.
the audience, and then I have a question too. So Eric wants to know: were the imagery on cards adapted or kept the same when friars were carrying them to the frontiers?
So this is an excellent question, and I'm going to ask that we come back to it at the very end because I've got a really cool image that will both answer it and further make that question complex. Generally speaking, yes, the cards were like a playing deck of cards were the same. But
all right,
we'll
MVP questions here. I have
Yeah.
a stupid question, which is okay. The response is actually the chicks and the snack.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Food.
I like snacks as well.
Food. Yeah. I think it's just like corn kind of thing, like what they want to eat kind of thing. Yeah.
That's awesome. Fantastic.
Okay. So in going through all of this, right, if I'm using bilingual dictionaries, one of the questions is like all of that wording is coming from Spaniards, though Alonso de Molina himself, the one who wrote the Nahuatl dictionary, showed up in the Americas when he was 10 and was raised with indigenous children. And so he's playing all sorts of games. And we have, and he's like, we know that bocce ball is there as well. He'll translate that in a confessional that he writes in Nahuatl and Spanish, where he's, make sure to ask them about bocce ball, right? So we know they're playing bocce ball. Their concern is that they're cheating. But where are the indigenous voices? And so in my sources, Fray Bernardino de Sahagún, a Spaniard, writes a 13-volume encyclopedia set known as the Florentine Codex. But it's not just him writing it. Like he's very deeply involved, but he has a good number of Nahuatl intellectuals who are trained in Latin and in Spanish, who are working with him to write this down. And they're writing it in Nahuatl and they're writing it in Spanish. And in this, we actually get to find out about the role of what indigenous women are doing behind the scenes to help with luck in games of Patole and how they're manipulating things. We also have documents at the Archivo General de la Nación, the AGN in Mexico City, that are providing some indigenous voices, as well as some African-American, African-Mexican voices, Afro-Mexican voices in the scene, that I'm getting at. So we're getting at some there. We have another friar who's writing about an indigenous bowler. That's fascinating because Duran is writing about how this guy is making a living by gambling and bowling, and he has an altar set up, and he prays to Maquil Soshit and the saints about bowling, and lights candles on his altar and has his pins on the altar to try and help them out. And Duran is like both upset by this, but also is like, but it's not different than the superstitions of the Spaniards, which Sahagún also says, like, in talking about what indigenous women are doing to help the outcome of Patole is like, but there's the superstitions of the women too. So like, or that Spaniards have, like, this isn't anything new. We also have this amazing, this is known as a biombo, this image that's up above. And so if you look sort of centrally, there's a pole with people dangling from it. That is the voladores, the flying pole image that I mentioned earlier. This is an indigenous wedding, but if you look at all the people who are there, on the left-hand side, you've got Spaniards. On the right-hand side, you have dancing indigenous peoples. You have a harp being played for music in that space. It's just a really interesting intercultural moment of interactions and exchange. If you look to the left again, sort of where the Spaniards are, under the yellow awning, there's a guy laying on the ground with his feet in the air and a log above it. So this is one of the log jugglers that I was mentioning, right? So these are indigenous performances, indigenous games, because they would place performances sort of like if you think about role-playing games or LARPs as performances, this is sort of in that space of performance. Or if you think about a sport competition, so the Olympic Games as you'd have gymnastics is often, it is a performance, but it is also a game, right? Where you get points and things like that. I don't know how they would score them. I don't know what the win objective is here. But in the literature I've been reading, they're more in the game space. So we have this image that's created and it sort of shows where some of this is going on. And then my favorite, there's an indigenous author who's the most prolific indigenous author to date in the Americas, known as Chimal Pahin. His name is much longer than that. It is Don Domingo de San Anton Muñoz Chimal Pahin Cuautle Juanitzin. He goes by Chimal Pahin. And he writes all sorts of books, but one of the things he does is he modifies one of the first books written about the Spanish conquest by Diego Almagro, or not Diego Almagro, sorry, that's a complete biff. Gomara, Francisco Gomara. Almagro goes south to Peru to help out Pizarro. So Chimal Pahin modifies this book that Cortez's secretary writes on the conquest of Mexico. And in it, in Gomara's version, he talks about how Ptolemy is similar to dice or something like that. And Chimal Pahin goes, no, Ptolemy is closer to chess and these other things. And what he's specifically doing, going back to those conversations about sin, but also like the confessionals for gamers, they classify different types of games. And chess is the best type of game. There's no problems with chess. It's cerebral, right? And chess isn't banned. Alquerque isn't banned. And so Ptolemy, right? So the translation for Ptolemy is dice, right? So it's always classified with dice games and card games. But Chimal Pahin, this intellectual indigenous person writing in the early 17th century, says, no, Ptolemy is like chess. It's higher up. It should not be classified with games of fortune. It should be classified with chess, which tells us a couple of different things. One is, right, he's writing in the early 17th century. He still knows how to play Ptolemy. He knows what Ptolemy is, despite efforts to wipe it out. And Chimal Pahin is writing in Mexico City. He is in the center of it all. And Chimal Pahin knows how to play chess, right? So he's playing Ptolemy, he's playing chess. He might also be playing Fertilis, which I might lean on you on that one, Liz, because it's a Roman game. There's a couple of other things. Yeah. So he's playing a bunch of different games in Mexico City that are both European and indigenous. And he makes corrections to Gomara's definition of Ptolemy based on his understanding of the games he's playing. Okay. Go ahead and give me the next page. So I'm going to expand upon this a little bit more, but sort of going back to the earlier question, right? So this is one of the first printed decks of cards in New Spain. It's that's officially printed within government auspices. There's also a standard deck of 48 playing cards that have coins, and if you get a Fournier deck of cards from Spain, they have coins, clubs, swords, and cups on them. The original set sort of, it looks like them. There's different flourishes and different styles, and but it's pretty similar. But along with those sets in the Archivo General de Indias in Sevilla is a set of tarot cards. And it's a fascinating set that I've really just started digging into a little bit more. I reached out to two really generous and amazing art historians, Barbara Mundy and Elizabeth Hill Boone, to talk to them about sort of the imagery that's being portrayed here. Because what it is you have some very European images like Hermes and others that show up in this. But you also then have, in sort of tarot form, you have the kings for the tarot cards are represented by indigenous monarchs. So in the upper right-hand corner, you have the image of Moctezuma, or Montezuma as he's known today. Underneath it says Mexico or Mexica. There's the symbol for Tenochtitlan in the upper left-hand corner. If you drop down a line and go all the way to the left, you have the final emperor of the Aztec Empire, Cuauhtemoc, who's there again with very Aztec name or Mexica name glyphs in the upper right-hand corner, labeling him and the location. And then as you go through that central line, the images are all very indigenous. And unfortunately, you can just barely make them out behind this black box. But you have two games represented on the back of the cards. You have the voladores, right? Those flyers are going around on one of the cards. And you have the log juggler on another card. And in my conversations with both Elizabeth and Barbara, they are convinced, based on the iconographic styles and sort of what's being done on these images, that the artist is indigenous, at least the artist who's creating the indigenous cards. And the images are very reminiscent of the Florentine Codex by Sahagún and the images showing up there that are done by indigenous artists. And so we have this European deck of cards. This one's incomplete. We only have 18, and we believe there are more sheets that just aren't there. But you have very indigenous representations in this. But not only that, you have indigenous people helping to create these cards by the end of the, this would be by the end of the 16th century, right? So again, these points of contacts are happening not only in the educational space that I've only alluded to a little bit more, I should probably go into a little bit more, but you also have them happening in the social context where they're playing the games and then where they're making the games. So I hope that answered the question, and also sort of creates an itch to look a little bit more into these cards. Anyway, I think that's where I'm at. Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, this is awesome. So I'm assuming that your research is ongoing.
Yes.
I know the book's not finished. Do you have a sense of where it's going, or are we being coy
Yeah,
about it
I mean,
for now?
so I was really hoping to be further in the writing than I am at this moment, but I've got, right, 4 chapters roughed out. This final chapter, which most of this is on, it's not the final chapter. The chapter I'm working on right now is the 16th century stuff. This deck of cards shows up in there. The stuff on Gallina Ciega shows up in there. Really got too big. And so I'm creating a chapter on educational stuff. So one of the things I didn't mention here, there's indigenous people who are writing in Latin, right? Right. So they start writing in Latin. They're writing letters in Latin. They're trained in Latin. They write petitions to Prince Philip, so just before he becomes king, and to his mother, the Queen Mother. They write them in Latin, but they're Nahuatl petitions, right in the middle of the 16th century. They also write to them in Nahuatl, but they know that Latin is the legal language. The only Latin grammar published in Mexico, so using that printing press, that's the first one in the Western Hemisphere. It's published in the 1550s. It's got 7 chapters. 4 of those chapters use games to teach Latin. There you go, Liz.
Wow.
That's your new textbook.
I sense a collab in the future.
Right down the road from the University of Mexico, where this Latin grammar was designed to be used, is the Colegio de Tlatelolco, which is the sort of advanced college for indigenous boys in the 16th century. This is where Sahagún is getting his Latinist trained Nahuatl speakers who are being trained in these they are being trained in Latin at that school. We don't know for a fact that they use this same Latin manual to learn their Latin, the Latin grammar. But chances are good that's the one they're using because that's the one being printed in Mexico City where they're also being trained in Latin, right? So they're likely being trained also using these same 4 games, right? So game-based learning is happening in that space. Word games that are sort of they're almost like poetry slams in some ways, where somebody will do a sentence and then another person will do a sentence and another will do a sentence, where they're building off of each other, are very popular. And those are happening all over the place. But that's one of the things the friars are going to be using to teach, both to learn the languages and to have help the indigenous peoples learn Spanish. Right? There's I just found amongst the Maya, they're apparently doing hide and seek. And so that all of this just sort of humanizes, right? I don't want to say there isn't violence going on. There's absolutely violence going on. I have an image of a guy being hanged over his patoli board and they've lit a fire on it, to burn it, right? But that seems to be in a very short window of time. They want to get rid of patoli because of its connections to pre-contact deities. But as we saw with Chimalpaquin and then the unknown Jesuit writing the Doema dictionary, patoli continues to exist. My suspicion is patoli stops being played not because it's being forced out, but for the same reason that many hobby gamers don't play Monopoly, right? They're just bored with the game and they've moved on to more interesting games to them that are interesting to them, right? I don't want to say that patoli is interesting. I think there's lots of things there, but like there are other games that are available to them and they're moving on to those, right? For the same reason that gamers shift to new opportunities today.
Oh, that's really interesting. And then we got one more question before I let
Absolutely.
you go. Eric wants to know, any idea what the animal hybrids are on these cards?
Yeah, so there's actually a specific creature, this one that's right in the middle. There is this interesting monster creature. I've got a write-up of it, of more detail someplace else. But he is birthed from an indigenous woman. At least that is the belief. So some people believe that this creature is born of an indigenous woman in the 16th century, and this is a card that represents this weird animal hybrid. And he's got those are apparently the intestines hanging out of him, as opposed to male genitalia. But so that one is I'm trying to look at it here. I can't quite make out the word from here. But just a mythological monster from that space. On the left, that is sort of a Quetzalcoatl-like figure, right? So the Aztec deity of Quetzalcoatl, who is more human and flawed than some of the other deities out there, he's known to play games as well. I don't know that he's on the tarot cards for that purpose, but he's the god that brought Ulami to the indigenous peoples as well. He's a god of abundance. So that's that one. In the upper, sort of just above the word end, that's a straightforward monkey, as you see everything else underneath it. The other ones on the left are Greek creatures, not Mesoamerican creatures. Again, I've got an article, it's in Spanish, that I just went through on those. I wasn't, as soon as I realized they were Greek creatures, I sort of set them aside because, I'm not terribly interested in that.
How dare you?
I know. But, we've got other people who are better able to study the Greek and Mediterranean area than I am, Liz. So there you go. You can take a look at these 16th century cards too. I should also say, sort of in the realm of cards, I guess, there's I've just started getting a peek at some of them, but there's a move in Europe at the end of the 15th century, beginning of the 16th century, to do educational cards. So you'll have cards that teach geography being written in England. There's Dominican friar who creates a deck of cards to teach himself, I believe, Latin grammar that people are really impressed by, that we get notes on. There is a deck of cards at the Fournier Card Museum that I'm going to go look at this summer that list and provide details on the Mexican, or not the Mexican, the Spanish colonies. And so Mexico's in there, Peru's in there, and a bunch of others are in there to just provide those details to people.
That is awesome. All right, so we have gone just a little bit over an hour.
Yeah.
So we're
Sorry
gonna
about
stop
that.
here. No, it's perfect. But Jon, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your research with us. This is super interesting, and I feel like I learned a lot. So hopefully everybody else who watches feels the same.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to everybody for the questions, Eric especially, and yeah, have a great day.
All right, y'all, don't forget to like, comment, ask questions. Most of all, happy gaming, everybody. Good night.